WinBack, or Operation WinBack as it's known in Powerland, was released in 1999 on the N64. While seemingly a run-of-the-mill third-person shooter at first glance, on further research you'll find that it's actually somewhat of a pioneer. WinBack was the first 3D shooter to include a real-time cover system. This may seem standard now in games like Gears of War or the newer Grand Theft Autos, but at the time it was considered quite groundbreaking because nothing like it had quite been seen before. The original Metal Gear Solid came close, yes, but that was more about taking cover and hiding rather than, well, taking cover and shooting terrorists. Anyway, all great game mechanics that are then copied by everyone else had to start somewhere and usually seem quite dated in the present day. So let's find out how it's held up. There is actually a coherent storyline for the game's type and vintage, believe it or not, and is based around the unfortunately named SCAT. SCAT is an interesting choice of an acronym that stands for Special Covert Action Team. They've been deployed because a terrorist group, Crying Lions, have taken control of a laser weapon in space. Crying Lion's first order of business was to use said space laser weapon to attack the Center of Space Development, which was one of 2 locations where the weapon could be activated. With that now a smouldering glimpse of its former glory, the terrorists have now taken over a secret base in West Ham where the laser weapon in space can also be utilized. You play as John Luke Cougar, as you and the rest of SCAT retake the base and the space laser weapon. You've only got so much time, however, as they're charging the weapon up and getting ready to vaporize something else. I'm tempted to label the story as a bit generic because, well, it is. However, I found it entertaining nonetheless, and I feel that it added a lot to the game. There are plenty of cutscenes that include humor and important developments in the story, so I'd recommend watching them unless you're in a particular hurry. As I mentioned in the intro, WinBack is considered the first third-person shooter to include a cover system. This works better in some situations over others, but is a decent first effort. It works the best when John Luke is standing at a wall and peering around a corner, but falls apart a bit if he's behind a half wall or a crate and constantly popping up to shoot enemies like a meerkat. Sometimes, the game makes him instead slide out to the side, and reactivating the cover mechanics doesn't work, so he instead continues to crouch like an idiot in open space and gets shot. In these situations, I quickly learned to not use the cover mechanic at all, and instead just simply crouch, popping up when I needed to shoot a full, and then quickly crouching again. Like I've said though, the cover system works well if he's instead standing against a wall and shooting around a corner. There were times when the game didn't register that I wanted to take cover, but for the most part, the system worked like it was meant to. It'd be nice if the game also allowed you to take cover next to a closed door and open it, but I don't recall there ever being any enemies hiding directly behind a door, so that wasn't really an issue. Shooting a gun accurately using the N64's thumbstick isn't really a fun task, so to help there is also an auto-aim as well as a laser sight for each weapon. This may have made the game a bit too easy in some instances since you spend it mostly hiding behind a wall, picking off enemies one by one, only leaving yourself open to fire in short bursts, but it's how the game is meant to be played. The developers were certainly going for a more strategic angle as far as the gunplay went, as if you instead simply try to run into an area guns blazing, you likely wouldn't last too long. Funnily enough though, the game uses this to its advantage if it wants to add some difficulty. Some enemies will run at you, and since you can't move while shooting, this can be a bit tricky as locking onto a close moving target while you're not in cover almost never works the first time. Luckily, the enemies are always in the same place, so if you die, you'll be prepared for them the next time around. However, I can't help but think this is a bit cheap of the game designers since it goes against how they want you to play the majority of the game. Most of the enemies are sporting AIs that are comparable to those who used to plank on balconies, as most of them don't take cover themselves. There are a few types that will actively try to duck behind a wall or move around constantly, but most will just stand there and presumably hope for the best as they try to shoot you. There was the odd instance where I was taken by surprise, mostly by the ones that run at you with a knife, but for the most part they were predictable. There is a healthy smattering of bosses included as you progress through the game too. These characters are usually on the eccentric side, but not really memorable, and are quite easy to beat too, thanks to the cover system. Each fight was usually a waiting game as you waited for them to stop attacking, so you could pop out of cover and do some damage. There are a few exceptions to this though, with one example being the boss fight with Thunder, since he chases you around with a flamethrower that does huge amounts of damage quickly. You can't hide behind cover as he'll roast you alive as soon as you stop moving, yet the game makes it difficult to lock onto him as he moves around quite quickly. It forces you into this run and gun gameplay that doesn't really work for the mechanics provided, and it sucks. It really annoys me when games take a giant leap away from the core gameplay for their boss fights. A more modern example of this is Deus Ex Human Revolution. The mechanics don't match up and it becomes ridiculous, however, it was at least super satisfying when I finally did beat him. there is a limited choice of what to shoot the crying lions with, as there are only 3 weapons. There is a handgun, a shotgun, and a machine gun. These all work as intended and like every other shooter out there, although the handgun has unlimited ammo. Traditionally, the handgun is seen as the weaker weapon, only to use when all else fails. In WinBack though, it's powerful enough for the most part. Sure, the shotgun is more damaging at short range and the machine gun takes down enemies quicker, but the game doesn't exactly shower you in ammo for either. There are a few other objects like C4 you can plant in a particularly useless torch, but for the most part, you'll be using the handgun. WinBack is quite a long game, with the West Ham base being quite a large semi-linear environment. Just like in Half-Life, you're continuously moving around the complex and not missing any of the location. The entire game is travelled through in real time, if that makes any sense. There is a fair bit of backtracking involved though, which can get a bit annoying as it can make the progress feel slow. Otherwise, there are a few deviations scattered around the place where you can search for pickups, which helps it not feel like such a corridor shooter. There are even puzzles that, for the most part, involve fatal lasers that block off areas. To deactivate these, a control point is to be found and shot at, although the game doesn't do a great job of hiding them. In fact, there are even several situations where the game shows you where they are when you enter a new area. It's nice they've added something to the primary gameplay at least though, so I can't fault the devs for adding it, even if a bit pointless. What's also cool is that the whole game is timed in real time in conjunction with the laser weapon going off a second time. If you dilly-dally too long like I did, then, well... Sorry, Mr. President. This adds a degree of replayability, as if you enjoyed it the first time around, you may be compelled to try it again and get a different ending. The gameplay is conjoined by a checkpoint system. While the number included can vary, generally there is 1 checkpoint per level that splits it right through the middle. There are unlimited redos, however, the checkpoints are fairly spaced apart. I'd guesstimate at least 10 minutes, although some could be longer. This, for the most part, isn't as bad as it sounds. Because of the cover system, most levels are played out in a fairly cruisy fashion. As long as you're playing the game properly, you're not really going to die that much unless a curveball is thrown at you like the previously mentioned knife-wielding maniacs. I feel that the placement of the checkpoints was reasonably thought out though, they would always be right before boss fights or tricky sections. WinBack has support for the Rumble Pack and requires the Controller Pack to save progress. However, there is no support for the Expansion Pack, which is a shame since the environments are so large. Having said that though, I did find the graphics to be of a reasonable quality. For one, I quite like the character models. While there is no animation like lip sync, the faces are nicely crafted even if in a static state. There is the trademark blurriness that's to be accepted for an N64 game, but I've found the environment to be detailed enough and there is some quite nice dynamic lighting on display. I guess you could say that the music included is dynamic also. As you lose health, the music will change from its usual tunes and get really dramatic. It's kinda cool in a way. For a while there it really made things all the more intense, but eventually it just got annoying. I found WinBack to be a very interesting game. It was cool to play something that achieved it first, and it's interesting that it's a hidden gem. No one really talks about it anymore. What's more, its developer, Amiga Force, is mostly known for the Dynasty Warrior games, so this would have been a huge departure for them. If this interests you but you don't own an N64, it was also released on the PS2 in 2001 with better graphics and voice acting. Furthermore, there was a sequel released in 2006 on the PS2 and Xbox called Project Poseidon, although this was largely unrelated to the original and received mediocre reviews.